ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another stream. It has been, as always, a pleasure to get this ready for you. Hopefully everybody is hearing me today, and I have made no stream mistakes, with which Tom and Rob will tell me, I'm sure. Is that right, Tom? Rob?
Of course.
Please tell me it has gone right for once.
I mean,
there's usually a delay, so I can't see. Yeah, it looks like it's working.
For the delay. The time has expired. It's gone to your game screen, so that's good.
That's good. Whew. A bit quiet.
It's very quiet. Yeah.
Well, I'm super quiet today. Let me see if I can just do some little settings tweaks. Let me see. Scene.
Da-da-da. How's that sound? Too quiet? Not quiet enough? We'll see on the stream in a second. I'm going to adjust my mic, guys. So I nearly got it perfect today, but I'm just not loud enough. And I hate my mic because it uses these horrible little things I've got to twist to try and get it a little bit tighter. But hopefully my camera is okay, my mic is okay, and you can hear Rob and Caesar. Can we hear you, Rob and Caesar?
They say we're quite loud.
You're loud. I'm quiet once again. It's because my microphone is not perfectly balanced, but that's okay. They don't really need to hear me that much, so we'll see. Hopefully we'll sort that out. Templar says sounds good, so I don't know. Maybe we're there now. Hopefully people can see the game. Yes, they can. Good. They saw my warships for a second. Right. Borg! We finally got to the Borg. Oh, dearie me. And, this is a faction, guys, that I think has gone through, I reckon, 5 rebuilds since its first starting point, if you like, in Armada 3. And I have long struggled with the Borg. I think I still struggle with the Borg even today, it's fair to say. But luckily I'm not alone, and I have the, as always, wonderful Caesar's Legion, or Tom, and Mr. Robert Saunders here with me. Tom and Rob, how are you guys? You good today?
Feeling better than I did yesterday. Certainly.
Good. And I mean, Tom, how do you feel about Borg being in the game, first of all? Because they're a tough faction to put in, aren't they, compared to the others?
They're a little bit obnoxious, unfortunately, just because of the way Gene Roddenberry and the directors of the Next Generation and scriptwriters for the Next Generation created that initial uber strength, the ultimate opponent for the Federation to fight. And so translating that into a faction that retains that vision whilst simultaneously satisfying the whims of the community fan base that want to screech broken, overpowered, my goodness, it's horrible, is a very difficult balance to achieve, because you want to feel like you are a powerful force, but at the same time you need to have weaknesses that can be explored and exploited, and it's a very difficult thing to sort of fine-tune within the realms of the Sins engine. Yeah,
100% agree. 100% agree that also that they're kind of like the ultimate enemy. I think in most of Star Trek lore, they're kind of seen as the big bad guy. And actually, if they ever really fully turned their attention to the Federation would just lose. There would be no Alpha or Beta Quadrant. They would be assimilated.
Until future Janeway comes along, with some
single-handedly defeating them.
Single-handedly defeating the Borg for all time. Just Janeway. Go Janeway. Girl power.
The Dominion didn't get defeated by just one ship, so I feel like the Dominion actually might be more powerful.
We'll come on to the Dominion another day. But Rob, talk to me a little bit about the faction before we dive into the ships. Talk to me a little bit about the faction today. On the 28th of November 2020. Because you've played this game a long time, and the Borg have always been, from us just chatting, a little bit frustrating for you as well. How do you feel they are now here as of today in the game?
Yeah, so traditionally, I think it's actually been a lot harder to balance the Borg. Because of the new weapon and armor type systems, there's a little bit more you can do to counteract what they're doing. So I think where the Borg are now is much better. They're going to be still very, very powerful in the late game, but they're going to have some weaknesses that you can exploit in the early game. Their economy is highly reliant on trade. Their ships there's a lot of them that are very heavy or heavy armor, so you can, if you're a faction that has good counters to that, you'll be able to do quite well against the Borg. And from the other side of it, from the side of playing the Borg, your capital ships are all going to have a very unique weapon type that will essentially affect all types of ships equally to kind of simulate the adaptation of the Borg. And this should give the Borg a unique and powerful feeling, as they're the only faction in the game now that have anything like that, while still giving them weaknesses that can be exploited, like their speed or the kind of just strength and expense of their capital ships.
And I think, guys, you know, the big things I'd say to you about the faction now is believe it or not, these ships you see on screen, this was me getting prepared for the stream tonight. I actually ran out of supply trying to get all of the ships and heroes on. That's how supply demanding they are now. And you may think, oh, Bane, that's shocking. That's a really small fleet. But it's the capital ships that really do cost now. And you're going to say to me, well, Bane, the capital ships weren't so great in the current build. But I think it's fair to say the capital ships are in a lot better place now. And there's
Borg.
Yeah, they are Borgy. But there's several reasons for that. One, we know that capital ships... there's not as much that can go toe-to-toe with capital ships before. So across all the factions, the capital ships are a little bit stronger now. And that's a good thing. I think it's not overpowered, but it does keep them around a bit longer. And the other thing, you know, we talked about, Rob alluded to the composite damage, as we call it there, where they can literally, a cube or any other Borg capital, so not the cruisers, but the Borg capitals, can basically apply its damage to any other class type. So it can go, right, I want to do damage against a cruiser, I apply my full damage. I want to do damage against a frigate, I apply my full damage. So they don't care, as the capital ships, about the damage type system as much as the other ships. They're good. That doesn't mean they're the best. There are certain in certain factions there are weapons that are better against one type, but they're the jack of all trades. They can damage everything to a reasonable degree very, very well as their capital ships. So it gives you a really, really strong flavour. And also, what you'll note is that they're incredibly tough. So they have very high armour, fantastic regeneration, and fantastic damage output, and they can hit multiple targets. And we're going to go into that a little bit more when we come to capital ships and talking about how the new cubes work, because the cubes have actually been reworked. There's we can't go into details, but they're actually missing one ability each moment, which is going to come up in a news post in the future, as we're still developing some very cool tactical abilities for the two more famous cubes, the standard assimilation cube and the tactical cube, to make them feel worthwhile, interesting. But we did simulate, I can tell you this, and we will show you this tonight as well. We did simulate a battle just against the standard assimilation cube now, and it was actually quite shocking how much damage and also how much resistance a standard cube can take when fighting others. So the cubes themselves will be a thing of fear, I think, but also the lesser capital ships, so things like the tactical sphere, have had a lot of buffs as well. And the other capitals were already good. So hopefully Rob and Tom are going to take us through all the capitals later in a bit, and tell us their strengths and weaknesses and how you should use them if you're going to play in competitive multiplayer. I think for those that are more casual and PvE, are the Borg playable? Absolutely are. The Borg are still a faction that if you play in PvE, you can really, really have a great time. They're a bit slower to get started than other factions, but they're so tough and so strong. So you can't really go wrong. But we have built some more innate weaknesses to their playstyle in the forms of things like transport gates, which I'm going to get Tom explain a bit later on once we've gone through the ships. And some other things you need to be aware of if you're used to playing the current Borg as they stand now in the mod. But let's start with the ships, because that's always what we like to do. And we're going to start, if I can find it, it's somewhere around here. They're so small compared to everything else, I have to zoom in. And I'll start with the Humble Interceptor. Tom, do you want to tell us about the Humble Interceptor ship?
Yeah, so the Interceptor, like your sabers and your brels for the Klingons and the Federation, respectively. They're your basic starting frigate. The Interceptor is it's the same ship that was seen in Voyager at the start of the episode, the two-parters, Duck Frontier, is it? They want to steal a transwarp coil. So the Interceptor, as a role type, is now your anti-medium frigate. And the Interceptor, and indeed I think most of the early Borg frigates, not only are quicker than certainly the capital counterparts, but they also come with the micro transwarp ability.
They do indeed.
And so this will really help you catch up to or get closer to potential targets that your enemy is fielding. So if you're, for example, needing to chase down enemy carriers, Curries or Corellis, packs of interceptors will do very good damage to those targets and quite quickly take them out, which when you combine that with the dodecahedron, which I'm pretty sure has the micro jump as well, you then have a very good not only anti-strike craft force but also anti-medium cruiser type strike force as well, that can retreat quickly if it needs to, but also engage quickly when it needs to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see this on another ship as well in the game, but the Borg do it slightly better with their damage, but they also have this lovely fracture armor ability, which is just fantastic. Any ability that takes armor away in the early game is a fantastic ability to have.
Very useful.
Very, very useful. And it does make a big difference.
And it targets everything.
Yeah. And also, they're pretty tough still. I mean, they've got 5,000 health, which is... this is at max research, of course, but even at max research, they're pretty tough. I can't remember what the stock is now, but
base hull value.
Look at that armor.
So just
that
under
says it all.
3,000.
Yeah, and the armor of 20, obviously at max research, they're pretty good. They're pretty good.
Well, I mean, just to contrast, the Saber has 1 armor at starting level. The Interceptor has 7. So you're going to be surviving. Even without the shields, you're still going to be surviving a fair amount of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from the design element, we haven't got Max here this week, but Max spent a lot of time on a lot of these designs, redoing the textures over the years. And you'll notice that on each of his models, he sort of perfected these kind of cut-out pieces on the models themselves, so you could get the kind of effect that you see with the green glow, if you like, coming from the textures underneath. So multiple layers. I kind of miss him actually tonight, because it would be good for him to kind of explain a little bit more about how he did that. But yeah, he spent a lot of time texturing the board to give them their Borgy feel, and I think he enjoyed it. And he spent a lot of time on all the cubes actually. And I think he would say, if he was here now, that he could do even more than he did originally, I'm sure. Rob, let's take us on to the adequately named probe, or sometimes referred to as the Dart.
Yep, so this is another instance where you have a corvette that is anti-corvette. So the probe is a light ship armor-wise that is good against light ships. So this will counter Miranda's, it'll counter Shrikes, it will counter basically the corvettes of the game. Outside of that, let me pull up my other screen. If you hover over the abilities, I believe it also has the micro jump.
It does.
It does. And then it has this kind of stacking buff. The more probes you build, the more damage output and damage reduction that they will gain. Yeah. So they're just a really solid anti-corvette ship.
Yeah, and all our corvettes stack up to 20 times, so obviously the more you have, as you said, the better they get. And actually, out of all the buffs, this one is very, very interesting, because you're getting a pure damage output percentage, but you're also getting a pure damage reduction, which given the fact that the probe anyway, again, I think it starts with 7 as well, Caesar, is that right? I think it does.
7 armor? Yep, yeah, 7 armor.
And it gets up to 20 armor. That is considerably tanky. So one of the feelings you will get is that all the Borg ships are incredibly tanky, yeah, and someone said, I see they use isokinetic pulses now instead of cutting beams. They do. It looked really weird, these kind of little things using cutting beams. So we've changed them over to isokinetic pulse. We felt it fit a lot better from an effects point of view. And when we go out to combat, we'll show a few more of these off. I think one of the big things I always like to remind players is you can scuttle and salvage any ship, and actually that's pretty a legitimate tactic, isn't it, Rob, for Borg ships, because you don't have the supply you have with other fleets, so there is sometimes a need to use the scuttle command to kind of recoup some resources, and
it's better to trade them.
Yeah,
but if you're not going to get anything for it and you're just giving your opponent XP, then yeah, it's better to just scuttle them. You don't want to give your opponent XP.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only other thing I would highlight, of course, with the rejigged armor system, the probes will scale very well against things like the Defiant, the Cavort, the Harpy, and some of the Dominion and Cardassian Union Corvette style ships that are now in place. So when you're having to deal with these late game Corvettes, don't forget about the humble Dart.
Yeah, absolutely. These are fantastically useful ships, so do keep them around. And as you can see, their damage isn't fantastic, but it's not bad. It's not bad for what they do, and especially when you've got a lot of them from that damage increase and it stacks. And the nice thing about the Borg tonight, guys, I did miss the Scout, the very first thing, which I usually start off with, but I'll talk about the Scout. We have our Scout Cube. Don't expect much out of the Scout Cube, to be honest with you. It's going to do its standard scouting. It actually has transwarp jump as well, so that can be incredibly useful for just getting around. I know Rob likes to use it to wind up militia a little bit sometimes and make them go crazy.
I like to use them to draw things around. Yeah, I like to use these to, especially to distract players as well. You can fly around and kind of just get players to focus too much on this, and while you're doing other things.
Yeah, and actually, out of all the scouts, again, because they're Borg, they're actually, I can't remember what armor this one starts at either, but they're actually quite tanky.
5.
Yeah, five. So it's, again, for a scout, that's incredibly tanky. So they do last a lot longer as scout ships, and they're quite nimble. So probably one of the best scouts in the game, as Ikvix has just highlighted. And it's pretty relevant. It does a modest bit of damage as well, but obviously you're not going to use it probably for that. You're going to use it for scouting as well. And it has the wonderful detect cloak. Oh, there are random events turned on, so you will see some alarms coming up, guys, as we go through the ships. And then let's go on to our lovely dodecahedron. Tom, tell us a little bit about this one.
Well, other than the fact it's meant to have 10 sides. Or is it 12? The dodecahedron is your anti-strike craft, so as I alluded to with the Interceptor. It's your anti-very light ship, and the trend with the Borg really is, like with most other factions now, and very nicely accentuated with the Borg, ships tend to have one role, and they're very good at that role, and the dodecahedron is no exception. Frigate hunting packs of interceptors, probes, and dodecahedrons can be very effective if you're having to fight in corvettes, strike craft. You don't want to be amiss of dodecahedrons. They're the only ship in your roster that has anti-very light as a weapon type. So if you're not using them and your opponent is fielding a lot of strike craft, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
It is your first ship unlock, so you will always have access to it, and so all I can really encourage is that you don't forget about it. It can still micro warp or micro transwarp. I'm pretty sure it can anyway.
I don't think it can.
No, it can't. This is the one that can't.
That's disappointing.
Slightly slower. It's not. I wouldn't say it's slow either, really.
No, it's still a fast ship. So okay, that a little bit less flexible potentially than the Interceptor and the Probe, but still certainly something you want to be keeping around to help protect your Unic Complex or your cubes. or whatever strike force you're using.
Instructions received.
And pretty good with its anti-cloaking field as well, because they don't have a lot of anti-cloaking, so having the cloak scan on it is incredibly helpful if you want to try and find those pesky Klingons and Romulans, as Borg like to do. Yeah. So I think it's a good all-round little ship, and actually the isokinetic pulse when you've got max research is actually pretty decent. So it's not too bad in terms of damage output either. I mean,
it will shred strike craft, and it will do very well against corvettes, undoubtedly.
Yeah, absolutely. Which kind of then brings us on to the last of the frigates, if I can find it. There it is, right in front of me. Which is Rob the Obelisk. He's a strange ship.
There's not too much to say about obelisks. They're going to be the tankiest planet bombers in the game. I mean, fly 10 of those into a well and shoot a planet, and if your opponent doesn't react quickly, they're going to lose their planet.
Yeah, absolutely. They have plasma emissions, so they kind of do this effect where they affect population growth rate. So it's a good all round ship. What I would say about the Obelisk, it's quite unique in the position that you can actually again use this one as a combat ship. You know, it's probably the only planetary bomber where it's actually very, very decent at combat. You can see here with the stats, it actually got very good isokinetic pulse, it has gravimetric torpedoes, it's got a fair health pool. So again, the Borg kind of are a bit strange in their faction design, in the fact they don't have a lot of ships, but the ships that you have, while they're still designed specifically for a role, they do have the ability to secondarily do another role reasonably well, and I would say that the Obelisk is one of these that kind of fits into that spot.
Was it very heavy? Or no, it's a heavy ship with anti-heavy, isn't it?
And anti-heavy, yeah.
So that's pretty good.
Yeah, and I think that's important to know. So this is a frigate, but it has heavy armor. So this is a very, very good ship. Obviously, there are weaknesses, and I think, if I remember, the ships that are anti-heavy, there are some in some of the factions that are particularly good against anti-heavy ships. So it does have its weaknesses as well, even in the early game to certain factions. So just something to be aware of, but not a bad ship at all. So that's, believe it or not, guys, that is our frigates already done, because that is all the Borg frigates. They don't have a lot of frigates, they don't have a lot of cruisers, because the Borg don't need lots of silly ships. They're not humans. They just make things very functional. And it brings us on to our very first cruiser, which I know was much loved in the current version, but it's had a lot of changes, because this one was always probably one of the hardest cruisers, believe it or not, to balance, was the Pyramid. It either came in too early and was too strong, or it wasn't strong enough. So we spent a lot of time on this. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about the Pyramid?
Yeah, so the Pyramid in the past has been a little bit of an awkward thing to deal with, because it's quite early in the Borg tech tree. Actually, balancing it in the past was quite difficult because of the way that it had a very heavy... I think it had heavy armor and a very heavy weapon type. So essentially it hard countered any sort of early or mid-game cruiser that could be fielded by the other factions, and the other factions didn't really have anything that could counter it particularly well. With the revamped damage types that we've got in place now, it has an anti-medium damage types, the same as the Interceptor, but with the heavy armor instead of the light armor. So if you have, for example, a Federation fleet fielding things like Intrepids, Constellations, to try and counter an early game Interceptor force, building into Pyramids will then give you a effective counter against them. In terms of that, broadly speaking, it's a tank type vessel. It's got repair abilities. Since the Borg don't have carriers, it's also your colonized neutral ship, I believe. I think Keith has helpfully highlighted that in the string now, to help give some further clarification that it is in fact the ship that you use to capture neutrals. And I don't remember its third ability, I'm afraid.
It's got shield drain torpedo.
Oh, okay, shield drain torpedo. Yeah, so you use it to reduce the, I don't know if it's direct damage. It's a shield block, so you can bypass the shield slightly, isn't it?
That's right. It's a bit like bypassing shields. So it applies extra damage through that normally wouldn't get passed through.
Yeah, Yeah, so it's a good, definitely a good cruiser to keep around.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reinforced hull is good because it gives damage reduction to itself, which is always great. And as you can see, again, this is another ship that gets up to 20 armor with full research. And what you'll notice here, guys, on the info card is actually there's a big jump in the damage now. So as we're getting to the Borg cruisers, and again, this isn't max research. You just have to take that with a pinch of salt. But at max research, it's doing a staggering 221 damage for its cutting beam, which is pretty good. Now the torpedo's a little bit underwhelming, but again, this is for a mid-range ship. This is pretty decent. But the one thing you need to factor in is the supply of these ships, and we'll come over to the supply because I think that's important. We highlight that when we look at the ships in a little bit. But pyramids, pretty decent. Rob, do you find you build a lot of pyramids still when you're playing?
I mean, you gotta have them for anti-medium. They're still the anti-medium king, really. You're so like any other factions, medium ships like Katingas or like Intrepids, those kinds of things. This thing will completely destroy them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we're going to go on to the next ship, which, Rob, has changed a lot. Was kind of like the ugly duckling for a long time in the mod and didn't really have a place. And I think we pretty much rebuilt it a lot on your recommendation. And for you, this is kind of like this ship has come sort of out of its shell and is really one of your favourite kind of go-to ships now, right?
Yeah, this is my go-to cruiser for just pure combat. It's now heavy anti-heavy, so that's kind of unique. And it's just a monstrous ship. It has a couple of really good abilities, so it can assimilate ships, obviously. And then if we hover over the other abilities, it's got some really powerful debuffs also. It can destroy the speed of enemy ships so they can't get away. And then it has a shield mitigation debuff that will essentially make the enemy ships take more damage. So,
which is particularly strong. You can't have many of these, but it's very strong. And the Borg really need that debuff to kind of go slug it out toe to toe. So I think it's fair to say you would want some of these assimilators. I think, Caesar, we're even going to review the shield overload pulse just to make sure it's not too strong before we release, right?
Sorry?
I think we're going to review this one in particular, the shield mitigation on this one, just to make sure it's not too strong before it releases.
Yeah.
I don't think it's too big of a deal because of its target's limit.
Just be wary of, certainly. The target limit, I think, should be okay.
But between the supply cost of the ship and the target limit, I think it's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, we're gonna review it a little bit. But yeah, it's a good one. We mentioned the auto assimilator there. That's what the assimilator does. The people tend to forget about this ability, but it not only just assimilates frigates, corvettes, but it also disables abilities, and that a lot of people forget that as well. So actually, while you're being assimilated, you're kind of that ship's struggling it. So lots of assimilators can be great. Just remember that if you assimilate ships, though, they do count towards your supply. So it's something you just need to be wary of. I like to assimilate ships myself and then scuttle them for their lovely resources. So that's what I tend to do. But I'm not necessarily the greatest player in the world, but that's what I like to do. And again, if we're looking at the hull, it's quite a tanky boy. She's got a little bit more armor now. She's got 21 armor at max research. Very tanky. 18,700 hull points, not to be scoffed at. So very good ship. I think you guys will now want to build the assimilator moving forward. And again, it's anti-heavy, right? I forgot. This is what we said. Anti-heavy. I think it is. Yeah. So again, this punches quite high for what it is, and I would dare to say that actually, this is actually going to do a lot of damage to a lot of enemy ships in terms of.
I think it's numbers. The only anti-heavy cruiser. Like a heavy cruiser that is anti-heavy cruiser. I could be wrong.
I think you may be right, I think you may be right.
It's very unique in that normally you have to tech up higher to hit heavy properly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, assimilators, guys, much better, much improved. I think you're going to like them. We'll find out. And then, Tom, we're on to sort of another ship that was a bit of an ugly duckling and didn't really have a place. But again, while it is quite expensive to build, more expensive than the simulator, it's come into a bit of a life of its own because of its abilities. Do you want to take us through this one?
this the wedge? Chance.
This is the adapter.
Sorry, not the wedge. I'm reading my own things and getting confused.
Yeah.
Adapter. Yeah. So the adapter. Let me find it. I can't remember what the ability loadout is.
EMP field, analyze weakness, and adapt hull.
Yeah, the adapter in the past, the adapter in the past never really fit very well because it's ultimately it's a support cruiser in a faction that historically has been more about just outright surviving and then damage output. I don't recall if the analyze weakness ability has been changed.
Slightly buffed.
I'm inclined to say it hasn't been changed too dramatically,
Nice.
but it's one of those things that often gets overlooked. So the way the analyze weakness works is that a little bit like how 7 of 9 has a jump ability between target bouncing ability. So the Akira might also be a good comparison with its chain reactor pulsar.
That's correct, yeah.
The analyze weakness will jump between enemy ships and place debuffs on them for a set period of time. The info card is a little bit misleading in that regard, because I believe the duration there is the duration of the initial cast, not the bouncing, which will then have their own subsequent durations, which I don't know off the top of my head, I'm afraid.
I think it's about 15 to 20 seconds from memory.
Probably about around that ballpark, yeah. So at the moment it reduces shield mitigation of the target, the armor, and the damage reduction. So it's just an all-round nerf to most stats for the targets that get affected. And when you compile this with things like the We Are the Borg on the cubes, the shield mitigate or the shield bypass on the pyramid,
the shield overload pulse of the assimilator.
You have the potential to make some very squishy opponents that are perfectly suitable for assimilation into the collective. In addition to that, you have a hull repair ability, which is just a flat number and some repair over time. The thing to keep in mind with the adapter is it's quite antimatter hungry.
Yeah.
So if you're wanting to field quite a few of them, this is where certain synergies come into play. Having a diamond nearby with its antimatter restore is going to be very useful for keeping those abilities actually working. Then in addition to that, just in case you wanted to be lazy and not have to press any buttons, it does come with a passive decloak. So although you can use a dodecahedron to decloak, you do have to press a button there. So if you don't want to press a button, you have a slightly shorter range passive decloaking ability on the adapter.
Which is amazing. I can't tell you how amazing that is for the Borg, because they lack it. Yeah, and I always say that this is the only passive in the game for decloak. So just to have like a shit that just floats around and goes, "Yep, I'm going to decloak you, I'm going to decloak you, and then decloak you," and it's brilliant. So I think you don't want loads of these in your fleet, but you do want maybe one or two to just add to the spice, I would say. And again, it's 21 armor. It's got the same health pool as the assimilator. It's a tough ship to take down now. So you probably will want to see a few more of these in your fleet. But a great ship. And then we kind of, Rob, get onto a boring one, I know, but we're onto the Wedge. Tell us about the glorious Wedge, the ugliest Borg ship that we have on display today.
Siege ship. It's going to blow up star bases. It's going to blow up buildings that are sort of along that type of armor. So it'll blow up any building, to be honest. Siege mode gives it such a damage boost that it'll just blow up buildings super fast.
Yeah, it's still, interestingly, although it has very little health, like a lot of the sea ships, I would say it's still the toughest sea ship because of that 19 armor. It's pretty strong still. I mean, you can kill it, but it is pretty good. And fantastic sea ship for taking out star bases. So. And then I suppose last but not least, I'll let you do this one as well, Rob, because I feel like the Wedge doesn't really offer you much. But we'll go on to the glorious. This has changed as well. The Sphere, Rob.
Yeah, the Sphere, for a fact, I know is the only very heavy anti-heavy ship in the game. So it is the king of heavy cruisers. It has the absolute best sort of lineup for being a heavy cruiser it'll counter heavy cruisers, it'll counter sort of very heavy cruisers, it'll do good damage to medium cruisers. It is like the king of those sort of higher tech tiers. And then ability-wise, it obviously has Regenerate, which will allow it to heal up, and then it's got Adapt Weapons Array, which slows things down.
Yeah, so this is one of these kind of cards. It doesn't really tell you the full picture, but effectively, as it fires its guns, it has a percentage chance, and I think it's 30%, something like that, chance to apply a debuff for 30 seconds against another ship. So essentially, it shoots an enemy target, and it can actually has quite a few target banks, the Sphere, so it can shoot multiple targets. And every time it shoots, it can apply a 70% speed reduction buff, which actually, when you've got a few spheres, pretty damn good. So yeah,
something
go on.
Something I would add as well, and this possibly isn't something that's been emphasized enough. When we talk about late game cruisers being anti-very heavy, something we haven't been mentioning is relation to the way capital ships now work, and that's in regards to the fact most frigates and cruisers with sort of light up to heavy damage type don't do a ton of damage to capital ships. The ships that will do damage to capital ships are your heavy cruisers, capital ships, and sort of bomber type strike craft, and then some exceptions in regards to corvettes that might have very heavy damage type. So the thing to keep in mind with these sort of late game very heavy cruisers is that they are required to effectively combat opposing capital ships, and that's sort of where although they'll do very well against heavy and very heavy armor themselves, it's against the capital ships that they are now sort of in place for, because obviously capital ships are more cost restricted. I mean in terms of sort of cost restriction in regards to the capital ship slots.
Yeah.
So when it comes to countering capital ships with capital ships, you're generally on the same sort of playing field if you just opt for that route. So the number of heavy cruisers, very heavy cruisers you have fielding will directly influence the capacity to take out capital ships of your opposing of your opponent.
And again, this as the Sphere goes, again with 22 armor and 22,000 health, this actually has, I think, more hull than some of the capital ships, if I remember correctly. So,
it would.
It's not a bad contender. You can look at the damage there, guys. Your 239 cutting beam damage is just amazing, really. Very, very powerful cutting beams. So, spheres are good, but they are expensive in supply. So, that's one of the things we're going to come on to supply in a little bit, as I said. And that leaves all our frigates and cruisers. So nice and quick tonight to go through the frigates and cruisers and start us on our journey of the capital ships. And Tom, I'm going to stick with you on this one, and we're going to go over the trapezoid.
The humble quasi-pyramid type vessel. The trapezoid sort of had a troubled past in the sense that it never really had any utility going into the late game. You'd use it to colonize, and then that would kind of be it. I don't remember if the harvesting device ability has had a rework. That's certainly something to look at. But to go in order, it has the Assimilate Planet ability, which also provides a permanent max population bonus.
Very good.
Which is excellent, really. With some of the changes we've made to the economy now, planetary population and tax income from population is quite a bit more influential than it was in the past. So sort of bombing out worlds, reducing planetary growth, reducing the amount of max population are all important ways to reduce your opponent's credit income. And so with the Borg having a larger total max population on a world, that naturally means additional credits, which can sort of help offset some of the negative trade income deficits that can occur by being raided that you might encounter. The harvesting device
has been increased, the amount you now collect.
it's an odd one because the info card is a bit of a misnomer, and I think this is a stream we're going to have to go over again.
Yeah.
Essentially, when ships are destroyed, they generate debris. Now, weirdly enough, in Sins, that debris actually has or can be given a quantifiable value in terms of credits and materials, and I think you can even apply experience to them, but that's not something we've done.
Yeah.
But harvesting a device will allow you to collect the debris, and I believe it heals the trapezoid.
It does, massively. It's awesome.
It's very significantly, and I don't remember if because of the healing it generates resources.
I think it gives credits from memory, the way I ended up using it. So I think it does give you credit income. I don't think it gives the other resources. I think it only gives credits now, but I need to double check.
I think it's something to look at, possibly.
Yeah.
But you can use it in the early engagements against militia, for example, to keep your trapezoid at full health, and potentially, after a little look, it might then also generate resources as well, which will help boost your early game economy a little bit more.
Yeah.
Then you have a siege beam, which... I mean, the damage output on the siege beam is it is good. It's most effective because of the way the speed of the trapezoid is. It's most effective against sort of low health worlds. That said, because of the way planetary health has been adjusted with the planetary system, it may now find a sort of new niche, because you only need to use a couple of casts of the siege beam now to potentially destroy potentially reasonably higher value worlds like the geothermals, for example.
Yeah.
So if your opponent's looking at the trapezoid and sort of laughing, that thing is going to take a little while to bomb out the planet, suddenly you activate the siege beam and the planet has lost 75 or potentially even all of its health, and you're already done. Job done, planet cleansed, assimilated, time to move on to the next one. So it does have that capacity. And then lastly, collective coordination, which is an AoE buff to all friendly vessels in the circle, which, given the size of Borg ships, may be less than you think. But it increases the armor, the max hull points, reduces the bombardment cooldown, and applies some damage reduction to your own vessels. I can't remember if the bombardment... let's just have a quick look at how it's affecting here. Okay, so the max armor... The additional armor, the max hull points, applies to itself, but the bombardment cooldown and the damage reduction applies to all targets in the area.
Yeah.
And so as you increase that, you're not only increasing the survivability of the trapezoid, more than just the sort of additional hull and damage output that you get from leveling, but you're then also increasing the damage resistance and the rate of bombardment of other friendlies. So a little siege task force of a trapezoid and obelisks, I suspect, could go quite a long way.
I think, Rob, you use it quite a lot, don't you, the trapezoid, in your plays you've done?
I think the trapezoid, this might be controversial, but I think it's completely necessary to get that thing out as fast as you can possibly get it out and start leveling it towards 10 immediately. You want to be, because I think it's the strongest tool you have as the Borg in the early game, to be trading out value. So the thing is, this thing generates value by killing enemy ships, but not dying itself, and it generates value in leveling up. And the more it levels up, the more it benefits your fleet, the more tanky it becomes itself. And it's already so tanky because it can heal off the harvesting beam and because of collective coordination, that I think getting this thing leveled up to 8 or even 10 as fast as humanly possible is almost necessary for the Borg. It's a huge deal.
Yeah, it's such a good. It's probably one of the stronger starting ships and vital to the Borg. So we kind of want you to care about your Borg vessels a little more, especially the trapezoid. But brilliant start vessel. Needs some love. Look after them. They're totally worth it, and you can't go wrong with them. And then we come on to the humble Rob Diamond. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Diamond class?
Yep. So the Diamond class, I think the biggest thing about it is its abilities. So why don't we just hover over those really quick? Antimatter recharge, obviously giving things antimatter so they can keep their abilities going.
Yeah, great for the assimilator. The adapter that Caesar was mentioning earlier. And then...
Yep. Then we got Adapt Hull Matrix, which is going to basically make ships extraordinarily tanky for a limited time. This is usually why you use these. Is say you've got a fleet, and then somebody's targeting like a useful capital ship or a hero. You use this on it, the hero's not going to die.
Yeah.
Ultradium Burst is just direct damage, bounces around, and it does a lot of direct damage. It's good. You should use it.
Oh, unpause it. And I don't know where the effect's gone for that. The effect isn't working. I will need to fix that. And then Nanite Projector.
Yep. So just a nice debuff.
And the effect's also not working for that. Unless my game is now frozen. I don't know. But weird. I will check those 2 effects out, guys. I don't know why they're not showing. But yeah, they usually does a nice little thing. So we'll get those checked out. If you can make a note for that, Caesar, actually, to check those 2 abilities and the effects.
Is that the Adapt Hull Matrix?
The old Tritium Burst and the Nanite, which for some reason aren't bursting. I'm not bursting. She's not feeling very bursty. It might just be a bug in my client, but they didn't show. So that's that. Again, just want to highlight the armour on these capital ships. Again, 29 armour, 38,000 hull. This is one chunky ship. This is at max research again, so, you know, a good ship to have. How many do you tend to put in a fleet of these? You just take one now, Rob? Or?
It depends on the fleet you're building. There's a strategy with these where you get 3 of them.
Yeah.
Or there was, where you get 3 of them, and you basically fly them around as their own fleet, kind of, and basically use the Ultradium Burst and the armor buff to keep them alive and keep them doing a ton of damage to a large quantity of ships. So you'd fly them into the edge of wells and kind of get as many kills as you could, and then you'd fly them out and repair them and bring them back, and you just keep doing that to gain value. That's a strategy, so it just depends on what kind of fleet you're going for. Whether you're wanting a more hit-and-run fleet, then you can use diamonds. Or if you want that big, just push the enemy over, then you're going to probably take... You probably won't take a diamond. You'll probably take more cubes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us nicely to the big sphere, Tom, which is the tactical sphere, which has had quite a bit of work done on it. Yeah. Or the one known for swallowing Voyager hull. That one.
Yeah. So this is where I will sort of highlight a little thing that Max would probably highlight. The tactical sphere and the main sphere do actually have different design models. So the cruiser sphere is the first...
There we go.
First Contact, I want to say.
Yes, correct.
Star Trek First Contact sphere that leaves the Borg cube and attacks Earth in the past. The tactical sphere is the scout sphere, which, definitely, not so much scout here. That is much larger and has the capacity to assimilate and sort of eat cruisers and frigates. And so that is actually represented in the first ability, the nanite consumption, which will target ships in the forward arc and essentially munch them. It will disable them. It should vacuum them in, essentially. And then, just like that, a little bit like how the trapezoid will take debris, the nanite consumption will just consume the ship as a whole.
It's very cool.
It's quite a nice ability, actually, especially for clearing out enemy frigate forces and cruiser forces. Frigates and corvettes, so certainly frigates and corvettes do quite well against Defiance, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Feedback Pulse is basically just a damage reflection ability. So, as the icon might suggest, in the episode Drone, Voyager attacks with a phaser. The sphere returns that fire directly back at it. So it not only does... the info card's a bit weird because it says it does a little bit of damage, but it also does damage retaliation. So whether that means it does do damage directly back and then also retaliation. I think that's what it's implying.
That does do that exactly. So it'll do a little bit of damage back, and this is very quick. These pulses like pew 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 pew. So every hit is causing this pulse to happen. So if you can imagine it getting hit quite a lot from enemy fire, every damage you're applying to it, 5% of that damage is then reflected back. Now, if you're attacking it with something big that does a lot of damage, that's an awful lot of damage reflected back in yourself.
That's quite a lot of damage reflected. Yeah, exactly.
And in fact, it had to be toned down quite a bit because it was a little bit too powerful. It used to be 10%, which turned out to be a little bit too good.
scaling with the levels.
Yeah. And it does actually get better. So now when you max it up, it goes to 20% in total with 15 damage. So if you whack it up, this used to go up to 50% damage reflection. So if you imagine, like, half of the damage you were doing to it got reflected back with every pulse, which is quite a lot. And then
a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And then going on to the third ability, which is absorb fire. So the tactical sphere, a little bit kind of like the feedback pulse, but kind of not. Whenever the tactical sphere gets hit, it will absorb antimatter equivalent to 5% of the damage of that particular attack.
Yeah.
And that, on paper, might not seem particularly great. But then when you've also got Obliterate as the final ability, which is a direct target ability which will reduce armor, energy weapon cooldown, weapon range, and chance to hit.
It's good.
You essentially do more damage to opposing vessels that have been targeted with it.
Yeah.
And I highlight the absorb fire and then go on to look at the ability and realize it doesn't have an antimatter cost, and that makes me think it probably should. But
it's a little bit of work to do.
That's something we can explore after the stream.
Yeah, absolutely. But let me just draw attention, guys, to again, because I think with Borg, the abilities are great. There's a lot of cool abilities, but I want to draw attention again to the hull and the armor. This has 31 armor at max research, and 31 armor is just simply a staggering amount of armor. So it is incredibly hard to damage tactical sphere, and this is the smaller ships. We're not even gone to the big capital ships yet. So really chunky armored ship. I've increased the armor on all of the vessels now, so because they are very expensive supply wise, but you will generally feel, and I think I would say, Rob, there is a use now for the tactical sphere, isn't there? Whereas there wasn't.
It's Obliterate is such a powerful ability. This is another one. You should just have one of these for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a need to look at these ships and have these. So that's the tactical sphere. I must say I quite love Obliterate and the tactical and some of the changes we made. I think she's a lot better than she was. So hopefully you'll build it, guys, and do in the chat feedback to us if you have any questions around any of these ships and concerns. Let us know. Let's move on, Rob, to the Assimilation Cube.
Yep. This is the first true monster of the Borg. I think these things are like the equivalent of Titans almost now.
Yeah.
If you look, we'll go with the hull and armor right off the bat. 37 armor without the adaptive armor even being up with a lot of things shooting it, and 67,000 hull. And I mean, look at the damage too. 528 cutting damage, like 208 torpedo damage, and these things have a ton of targeting banks compared to other capital ships.
I think it's it's higher than that now. I'd have to open the file. I think it's now 4 or 5. It depends because you've got research as well that also increases their targeting banks. So they can hit multiple ships. It's just crazy.
Two by default.
Yeah.
4 with research.
But what people often forget with targeting banks is it's per side of the vessel, and with the Borg cubes, because they are Borg cubes, they shoot every side. So actually, you're hitting more than that. So you're actually doing 4 per side, which is phenomenal if you stick it in the middle of an enemy fleet. So, which is what you're going to do with your Borg cube, because it's so massive, you can't help but stick it in the middle of an enemy fleet. And no matter what the enemy does, they're going to find it really hard to not get shot by at least 2 sides of a cube. So they are beasts. But anyway, Rob, I'll let you carry on.
Yes, the damage is. Sorry, there's someone in the chat mentioning that the cube is at level 10. It is at level 10, but even at level 1, these things are monsters. I mean,
yeah.
This is obviously max tech.
I can help with that. At level 1, the Assimilation Cube will have 36,000 hull, 24 armor, 217 cutting beam damage a second, and 152 per minute, and 152 gravimetric torpedo damage per minute.
Yeah. So yeah.
So just to get that out of the way, they're amazingly powerful right off the bat as well.
I think to be honest, by the time you get Assimilation Cubes, guys,
your techs are usually almost maxed anyways.
I would be very surprised if by the time you built the Assimilation Cube, you weren't getting it to level 5 straight away because of the research which allows you to gain capital ships levels automatically as the Borg. And that goes very quickly as Borg. So they learn as they go. And I think the Borg is one of those twin factions that gets so powerful towards the late game. They're pretty much a monster once they get to that point. So
yeah, once the progenitor's out, the game's over.
Yeah,
I mean, if it's built and you don't leave the game, you're BMing your opponent.
So I did lose my progenitor once, but only once. We won't go into that. So should we start with the abilities?
Yeah, so holding beam, it assimilates things.
It's good.
It's good.
And I think what a lot of people don't realise, because this has changed, is it targets capital ships.
And disabling a capital ship is good stuff.
Absolutely. So disabling a enemy capital ship, pretty good. So we've increased that as well because we wanted to really give the Borg cube more of a kind of high level feel. So definitely holding beam is a lot better now. Give it a try, guys. But I think like if you were going to target, if you're facing against the Federation. Holding a nebula, the Federation player is going to be very sad if you hold his nebula with your cube. Things like that. Anything that's going to really help your fleet out, or holding a Phoenix.
I would. So it can target capital ships. It can target heroes then by proxy. So you could.
Yeah, hold a hero.
You could disable. You could disable Wayun. That's massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Crazy good. And that's a change that wasn't in the current version. And then we've got Adapt Armor. Do you want to take us through Adapt Armor and how that works, Rob?
I'll explain the gist of it, but you'll probably have to go into the details of the exact limits on it. So what this does basically is every ship shooting it will apply this buff up to, it looks like it says 10 targets. So if you've got 10 ships shooting this cube, it's going to gain 10 armor and 10% damage reduction. And 10 armor is gigantic. So the more things that are shooting it, the more powerful it becomes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it lasts for 30 seconds. So, and it just becomes a beast, really. I think the tools
on top of the 37 armor, the 47 armor.
Yeah. One thing I'd note there, Caesar, the tooltip just needs a little bit of work. It says 3% per target, but that's not quite true. So we'll just get that updated as well. But yeah, Adapt Armor, very, very powerful now. This is mainly the ability that's probably going to save your cube. So if you're currently playing the current mod, it doesn't have this ability. It was only on the tactical cube. This is the ability that's going to keep that cube alive, and we'll give you an example of that as we move along. And again, if you upgrade it, this is what people don't realise. It actually, at max level, gives you a damage reduction of 4% per target shooting it. So this is actually adjustable. So if you've got 10 targets, that's a 40% damage reduction.
That's kind of madness.
Yeah. So I would strongly recommend that Adapt Armor is the thing you want to go for. Of course, Holding Beam is great as well. And then, of course, the loving ability at the end.
Giant debuff. Just take the enemy fleet and just hit the off switch. They don't need to function.
Yeah, absolutely. It instills sheer terror. It's instilled sheer terror now for 4 years in the game, I think. So, and it carries on in Sturgeon. It affects capital ships. It affects structures. It affects frigates, dreadnoughts as well, and corvettes. So it will actually target enemy dreadnoughts. So Titans, it will target those and do a debuff on them. There are very few abilities in the game that can affect dreadnoughts. This is one of them, and I think it's probably the single greatest ability in the game, I would say, barring Reaper Beam, but I would say that.
Yeah, as far as debuffs are concerned, there's not too many. I would argue maybe the one that Thought Gore has that gives the enemy ships, like all the enemy ships around him, minus shield mitigation, is as good. It's close, but this one's super strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, do you want to add anything on this one?
He refuses. He says no.
Tom says no. We've lost Tom. Tom's unavailable right now. Or his mic's not working. We'll find out in a second. Hopefully Tom's back, because we're going to go on to the tactical cube, Tom. Do we have a Tom? Have we lost Tom?
I think something's wrong with Tom.
Something's wrong with Tom. Right, Rob, you're going to have to cover the tactical cube.
That's fine. It's like the big brother of the Assimilation cube as far as damage and tankiness are concerned.
Slightly less health, which some people will question, but it
the
has
armor.
More armor.
Look at the armor.
Yeah. More armor. And actually, if you look here, it has 2 cutting beams.
Yeah, it does more damage.
It does more damage. And just a really chunky boy, really. There are 2 abilities we haven't shown tonight, which will be going on the cubes. But, yeah, fantastic. We'll start off with Exterminate, probably one of my favourite, like, just a massive ranged ability.
I'm sorry, I'm back.
Oh, sorry, there you are, Tom. Tom,
now he can talk about it.
He can talk about it. We lost you there for it.
Yeah.
So we're just on to the tactical cube. I just was going to ask if you wanted to add anything to the assimilation cube, actually, if you had any things you wanted to share. No?
Not particularly, no.
And we're going to talk about Exterminate. Tom, over to you.
Exterminate. So, anyone who plays a lot of different mods for Sins, of course, there are quite a few wide-ranging mods out there. Sins of the Prophets, Sins of the Galactic Empire, Star Wars Interregnum, Battlestar, Fall of Kobol, which is the Battlestar mod. One of my long-time favourites is Star Wars Interregnum. And the interdiction in the Imperial tech tree is one of the things I really enjoy the most.
Yeah.
And the tactical cube is essentially that ability with Exterminate. You disable the warp engines of vessels in that radius of effect.
Yeah.
Now, that is so intensely powerful because assuming you manage to stay in range as your opponent tries to jump away because they've lost an engagement, you can keep your opponent trapped, or at least a portion of your opponent's fleet. It does have a cap of 10 targets, trapped in the well because their warp engines will be disabled.
Yeah.
It is so good.
Yeah.
Your opponent's got some low health caps that are attempting to flee. You proc Exterminate, they can't escape. That gives you the window of opportunity you need to finish them off before they can run. It is such a good ability.
Yeah.
And at face value, it only disables the capacity to jump. But in practice, as a tactical usage, the ability to be able to destroy fleeing high value targets is always very important in Sins. Regardless of what that target might be. A level 8 Picard is attempting to flee. You definitely want to take him out. Exterminate will help you achieve that. A level 8 Wayun, or a Sovereign, an enemy Titan. All of these targets can be blocked from running, and that is so good.
Yeah. And Adapt Armor we just spoke about. It's no different here. If you buff it up, 4% damage reduction per target hitting it. We just need to change the. I was saying, Tom, we need to change the. Looks like the effect string hasn't been updated on the 2 Adapt Armors, so we just need to change that a little bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so again, if you're getting the tactical cube, you do want this. And again, we'll show you how it's like. It's got slightly more armor than the Assimilation cube, slightly less health, but as I said, what it lacks in health, it makes up for in sheer damage output. It's probably the most damaging capital. No, it is the most damaging capital ship in the game, just in raw damage, and has more target banks than the Assimilation cube. So a lot of people say to me, but the ASIM cube's got more health. Yes, it has, but the tactical cube has far more damage. And as I said, the to be released ability, which you'll see if you're following Star Trek Armada 3 on ModDB. You'll see a news article about the 2 new abilities coming up, as I've mentioned and I'm plugging on a regular basis here. So Tactical Cube, just a wonderful ship. Keep tuned. I think the new abilities coming on both these ships are really going to excite you guys when they get released. And that brings us nicely onto heroes, which we're going quickly. So we'll start with the very first hero, Rob, and that is the Queen.
Queenie Bee. So she's great. She has basically an amped up version of Ultradium Burst. She's also got, right there. She's got Radionic Pulse there, which is a debuff to enemy ships, which is lovely. And then I think the biggest thing on her really is the Collective, which just gives you that nice chance to hit buff as well as the whole restore rate for your fleet.
Which
and then
is fantastic, because that whole restore is the thing that the Borg do. They just regenerate so much.
So you don't lose your ships, and that's actually really, really important for your fleets, because if you lose your cap ships now on the Borg, it's much more punishing than it ever was before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's about how you synergize the capital ships in the Borg together. I don't think they're necessarily harder to play, because you don't have as many ships to worry about. So you can do a lot more by sort of, microing those ships.
I think there's a lot more nuances to playing the Borg now. I do think the Borg's a little bit harder to play. You have to know... You have to be able to kind of gauge engagements, because seriously, if you fly into somewhere and you've kind of misjudged the situation and you lose 3 capital ships, you're dead.
Yeah, I think that comes with a bit more experience, doesn't it? I think you learn what engagements you can take and what ones you shouldn't take, and also even like whether you fight in your opponent's grav well or you fight in your own gravity well.
Always fly around the edges of wells too, as the Borg, in case your capital ship's starting to get destroyed and you need to fly out. You don't want to be in the middle of a gravity well.
Yeah, that's the worst thing to do. So it's some interesting choices with it, and that's the Queen. There's not really much to say to her. She's a diamond. She costs. The supplies all change for heroes now for the Borg, so they do cost a lot more supply. You just need to bear that in mind as well. As I said, we run out of supply to fit all these ships on, so just something to keep in mind. Tom, 7 of 9, which I have not given any of abilities because I was lazy and clearly didn't click anything, so I will do that. 7
of 9. 7 of 9 is, to be honest with you, I can't remember the abilities off the top of my head. I remember there was one of them that in the past wasn't working properly, that I believe got fixed.
It did.
I think that might have been the calling reinforcements. 7 of 9 has a buff to self, which improves her own damage resistance and armor, but at the cost of damage output.
Which is just crazy.
But it is also a taunt.
Yes.
So your opponent might be thinking, I can just ignore her. But no. 7 of 9 will attract you and make you attack her sphere.
Yeah, and she goes to 66 armor, which is just sweet.
And she broadly won't take any damage while she's attacking you. So not only does, broadly speaking, the sphere itself have very good damage output and very good survivability, it is 7 of 9 does act as a direct sort of taunting tank vessel to direct fire away from some other high value targets potentially in your fleet.
Losing a hero is a lot less losing a hero is less of a pain, because you can recall it.
So very useful in that regard. She has a call-in reinforcements ability, interplexing beacon, which I would argue is actually a very cost-effective ability now. Only 3,000 credits, 300 metal and 250 crystal, and you can get some very good ships from that interplexing beacon. So definitely one to actually consider if you're looking for more cost-effective frigate reinforcements. And then lastly, her final
ability
is, I believe, the jumping one.
The viral
matrix.
So
yes. It is the jumping disable. Essentially, it will do damage to the targets it hits. It will disable their warp engines, their weapons, their abilities, their impulse engines. And as Keith has previously mentioned, disabling abilities is always very, very helpful. So for the discount cost of only 150 antimatter, which you can get even less with a diamond, go and disable everything and assimilate it.
Even better, notice that this one also targets dreadnoughts, which many abilities don't in the game. So why not disable the enemy's Sword of Kaelus's Bastion shield while they're trying to tank? That's Keith's handy tip of the day. I'm going to smile just at that idea of that. I've obviously got a broken sound effect I've just noticed on the ship as well, so I'm going to have to fix that. So sorry about that, guys, if you're hearing this a repeating sound. I've made a note to fix that. So yeah, if you use the collective defense, you could use the diamond, I think, to buff the armor even higher. So let me just quickly reload my Borg save so we can get rid of that annoying sound effect. So yeah, comboing the capital ships, Rob, is with the heroes as well. It's just generally a good all round game practice while this loads, right?
Oh yeah, you want your heroes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't sleep on heroes. They're all powerful. Every hero in the game is pretty good.
Yeah. So hopefully this will load pretty quickly, guys. Sorry for this. Just waiting for load. And do you find if you're building a fleet out now, Rob, how do you tend to what is the kind of layout of fleet you tend to go for, sort of
the Borg?
Yeah, for the Borg. Is there a particular? I mean, this is a very random fleet now, but
it depends on my strategy that I'm going for. Like, if I'm doing like an early game attack that I really want to just win the game, I'll go for 2 or 3 trapezoids and a bunch of just kind of a mix of the early game ships, and I'll just try to win with that. If I'm going for like a mid game and timing attack, I can do that diamond strategy I was talking about before. Or if you go for the de facto late game Borg, my thought process would be you would want a cube, either Assimilation or you'd probably want the tactical cube. At least, maybe you could even get one of each, and you'll obviously always want Locutus because he's just disgusting.
Which brings us nicely, Rob, to Locutus, which is I'm going to ask you to take us through now.
Yeah, so Locutus has a series of debuffs basically that will.
Yeah.
They just essentially just destroy the enemy fleet's stats. Like, you can see resistance is futile here. Is going to wreck their shield mitigation, wreck their shield block. It hurts their shield restore. It does damage. He has like a super version of We Are the Borg, terrifying presence. Yeah, right there, which is an extremely powerful debuff to the enemy ships. And he's got the adapt collective ability here, which buffs your own ships. Or no, what does this do?
No, you target. So this is a great one, actually. So you target enemy ships, and then what it does, it adapts your. So you kind of fire it off, and then it adapts your ships and gives you weapon range, damage output, chance to hit, and damage reduction in that circle. So it's pretty.
Oh, I see.
So you fire it at an enemy ship, but it actually improves your ships, and it's our way of.
Yeah, so it is a buff. This is a confusing one to me.
It's one of. I think we've got this problem with the info cards we mentioned before. It's really hard to do the adaptation kind of stuff with the Borg and make this make sense. So there's a few things we have not yet got to, and you'll probably see this on the Borg. This is where we wanted to show them off, but there's quite a little bit of work, I would say, to do still on the Borg in terms of the strings, the effect strings, especially on the heroes. So you can see why we're not releasing it, because I know a lot of you are going, why aren't you released yet, Bane? Because, as you can see, there's still some work to do, and this is the final version, so we don't want to go too early with it. But, definitely it's hard to kind of show the way the ability works on the info card, and that's why we're trying to work on the strings a little bit more. And we're talking to you about it on these videos, because I hope these videos will be around, but, we'll get there. Anything you want to add, Tom, on the capital ships in general?
Not particularly. I mean, the broad sense, really, and this applies for all factions. Don't be afraid to mix and match.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the ships that you have and the capital ships that you have all fundamentally will have ways to combine that benefit each other. And you can go for Locutus and a cube and stack Terrifying Presence and We Are the Borg. But especially with the Borg, because of the way the cubes have such a reputation, the Tactical Sphere and the Diamond and the Trapezoid are all excellent capital ships with some very good
arguably
abilities.
more useful in some situations as well.
And I think when playing the Borg, the urge is there to want to tech up as fast as you can and get all of the late game stuff, but actually the early game and mid game equipment that you have is oftentimes more than sufficient to see you through to victory. An assimilation cube at the end of a game is often can be a nail in the coffin. And oftentimes rushing for that sort of thing will leave you exposed and weak. So definitely keep in mind the earlier equipment. It is good. It is there. It will assimilate just as well as a cube will. Don't be afraid of perfection.
I like it. And Rob, this leaves me with the last Borg ship of the evening, the progenitor. Your nemesis of all nemesis.
And the game's over. Your opponent actually is supposed to leave the game as soon as this thing is built. It doesn't actually have to do anything. It just says your opponent has built a dreadnought, and you just go, oh, okay, and you leave the game. Otherwise, you have bad manners.
Well, hopefully, if you ever get to use it, perhaps in PvE. No, I mean, if you're in a large game, because I think this is the difference. If you're in a 1v1 in a competitive environment and someone gets the progenitor out, Rob is very much correct. I think it is very hard to come back against a Borg player if they manage to get their Titan out, because
unless you can trick them, like you fly in just Picard and you activate Corbomite reflectors, they fire the Reaper beam into Picard, killing their own progenitor, then they should leave the game.
Now, you said we weren't going to talk about that, but you've mentioned it now. You've mentioned it now. You made me very sad about that happening. So there are certain ways to kill the progenitor, which Rob has just alluded to, and I won't say that happened to me maybe once, but yes, but yes, the progenitor vessel 130. Oh, this is max research, about 136. Oh, this is only level 2 as well. 136,510 hull. There is nothing that equals this in terms of hull. It has 44 armor. There is nothing that really equals it in armor. Just base armor. Its damage doesn't seem that high, but then you have to bear in the fact that it has so many target banks. It's just ridiculous. It is a one.
This thing could shoot your entire fleet at once.
It's good. It's good.
The progenitor has 15 damage banks. Just to put that in, it will attack 15 different things to the fronts, the sides, each side, and the rear. That's how many.
It can shoot an entire fleet at once.
And when you warp it in somewhere, if you hear this sound, you know you're in for trouble. So, Progenitor's an interesting one. Tom, do you want to take us through some of the abilities here? My favourite being first.
Keith's Bane, Reaper Beam, is a direct damage beam, which should, in theory, one-shot anything in the game.
Including your own ship.
There's a couple ways to make sure it doesn't. Well, it used to not one-shot. Actually, now that he's added so much damage to it, I'm not sure there's anything that can survive it.
There might still be some things that could survive it. I honestly, as far as I'm aware, there shouldn't be, but who knows if we've missed anything.
It does 5 million damage. It's not happening.
The way you can sort of get around the Reaper Beam is if you have a weapons disable that can target Titans, you can interrupt it in the charge up. So if you let the Reaper Beam fire, it will do an awful lot of damage. If you interrupt it before it fires, you've just given your opponent a 10-minute cooldown. So they might still have 15 damage banks, but at least they don't have the Reaper Beam. So I think that's all that can really be said about that. It does damage. The second ability, I believe, is like a deploy probes.
Yes.
So it's just an extra support ability that calls in some small frigates. I think dodecahedrons. I want to say.
Yes. Here they
just
are.
to provide some additional fighter support if you need it. The third ability is...
Oh, they're actually... Can I talk about those for a sec? Because they're actually not dodecahedrons, really.
No, they're nanite pro. I'm not 100% sure what they do, to be honest. I can't remember.
So they have adapt weapons array. So anything they shoot at, they lower the speed down of the enemy. They have a shield drain torpedo, and they have adapt hull network, so they actually repair the progenitor as well. Because, the progenitor needs repairs, right? It always dies, so, I thought, why not? Let's give it some healing.
Needs some more repairs.
Yeah, so it heals itself.
I think that as much as we don't like to talk about Star Trek Online's influence in Armada 3, I do feel like those are inspired from Star Trek Online's sort of Borg event when it deploys the probes.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a bit.
That is where that's come from.
We actually get on quite well with the Star Trek Online designers. We've got a few friends over in the team there who love the mod. So there's a lot of good conversations.
There's some goodwill.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the third ability slot is a strategic ability, is the only way I can really describe it. It deploys a transwarp node on the planet, which transwarp is something we will go into shortly after we've spoken about the progenitor. Essentially, it creates a transwarp node, which then means if you have a transwarp node somewhere else in the galaxy and you've got forces stationed there, you can jump between the two wells.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the Vasari phase lane, but transwarpified. Or perfected, some might say. And then in the fourth ability slot, you have a... I want to say it's a debuff or a buff, but I honestly can't remember again.
This is the most horrible thing that was ever created by moi.
Assimilation cloud.
Yes.
That's it. It's another assimilation ability. I don't quite know how it differentiates from, for example, the Cube's tractor.
It's so...
beam. But I'm sure Keith...
let Keith explain.
It's so
Keith
good.
will explain the nuance.
It's so good. Basically, when it's shooting the 45 odd targets in your fleet, what you do is you wait for lots of his to be low health, and then you press the button, a puff of smoke comes out, and suddenly they all belong to you. It's great, and as you level it up, it can actually target more. So I think the maximum, if you manage to get the progenitor up, if you ever survive, if people don't give up on you by that point, I think you can target 20 ships at once and assimilate them.
Yeah, just one you need to take the autocast off on.
Yeah, you should turn autocast off by right clicking, and then just get everything down, and then have glorious assimilation. It's just over the top fun.
One might say it's free real estate.
Absolutely, yeah, it's great. That's the progenitor.
None of these things matter though, because as soon as it's built, you should leave the game.
No, I think the way to fight the progenitor is if you're playing a 4v4 player game or a 5v5. And you do have an enemy ball player on the enemy team. If you see the progenitor built, the only way to defeat it is to literally combine forces and take it on. Other than the aforementioned Corbomite trick, which does also work, if you trick a ball player into trying to Reaper beam your Federation starbase, activate its Corbomite reflector as soon as you hear the sound, and there won't be a progenitor left when it reflects the damage back on itself. So that's a good one to do. Or, as Tom pointed out, be really annoying. There are ships like the Nebula that loves to disable I think it's Nebula or the Phoenix likes to disable because they can target dreadnoughts, and they cause it to have random motion, and then you basically just get this spinning progenitor that can't do anything for 30 seconds.
Yeah, you can kill it. I say you should leave the game. You can kill this thing. Say you have 1 million more resources than your opponent, and you have a lot of production, and you can, lose 3 fleets, and it's not a big deal. you can kill it in certain ways, but even in big multiplayer games, if you stack too many ships in one spot and they fire a Reaper beam through them, it will actually kill the ships it passes through as well.
Yeah.
They can.
Yeah, it's a good Titan.
It is the most disgusting thing
in the game. But yeah, you're right. I think the thing is, it takes 10 minutes to build it as well. It takes ridiculously long to build a progenitor. So don't let the ball player build a progenitor. That's the moral of the story, I think, in this game. Which we agree, guys. It is a powerful ship, but in realistic, I think Tom made a really excellent point when we talk about the faction overall, and that is, it's very, very rare you'll actually get to the point where you'll get to max level Borg tech in a game, because one, their tech is quite slow to get through, and two, you will find that actually, and the way Armada 3 plays, we've talked about this quite a lot in the earlier faction reviews, because you need to be at multiple places at once, actually, and this is what you can see here, the progenitor actually takes up a heck of a lot of supply. So you have, we talk about choice, but you have a real choice here. If you build the progenitor costs 350 supply and 2 command slots, so it actually uses 2 capital ship slots just to build it, and 350 supply. That's an awful lot of supply that you're losing. And when you factor in you've only got like 1,075 supply to begin with, you really have to ask the question, do you want to play that way if you do get to that point? And you may decide that you've already maxed out your supply and you don't want to scuttle cubes and things like that are level 10 just to wait for the chance to build a progenitor, because it puts you on the back foot, because you then don't have the Borg fleet that you did have for your push. And you've got to wait for the 10 minutes for the progenitor to build. So it is, I would say, where the weakness is with the progenitor is actually the time it takes to build, the cost of the fin, and also the fact that you're having to scuttle your other ships if you actually want to fit it in. So that's the trick with this Titan. So yeah, that's interesting. Let's just go on to talk a little bit about the defences, Tom, and we'll start with the turret, the perimeter node.
The Borg have 2 turrets. In practice, they've got the defence node, which is just your straight up damage dealing turret. That's not going to change. And then you've got the perimeter node, which is essentially it's an assimilation turret.
Yeah.
It's a static turret for assimilation. So adding a couple of those around a defense node will assist with assimilating other vessels that are attacking.
Yeah. And do you have any plans for these? Because I know you're working on turret redesign. Is there any plans to build turrets?
It's hard to say. I mean, initially, yes, there was a thought process. I was considering sort of moving some of the one of the damage types off of the defense node and moving it onto the perimeter node, as a way of trying to encourage the perimeter node to be built more. Because at the moment, most people will just look at the defense node, go, "I need damage," and that's what they'll build. They won't really bother with the perimeter nodes.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, not helped by the fact that perimeter node is a support turret. I think what is going to have to... I'm not convinced that is the solution, because at the end of the day, the perimeter turret does have some very good abilities.
Yeah, holding beam is... Yeah.
The issue with the abilities, though, I think, is just their range, mostly.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the defense node in general, I think its max range is 6,000, which I want to say keeps it under the range of very heavy, frigates, which is kind of fine. But with the perimeter node, since its range is 8,000 on the holding beam, but 4,500 on the shield drain torpedo, you don't really use the shield drain torpedo at all.
Yeah.
So I think possibly the solution might be to bring the ability ranges up slightly higher on the perimeter turret, so that they can actually sort of potentially drag targets into the range of the defense node when you've got them up, assuming we can make modifications to the holding beam so that it will sort of tractor things in closer. Which I know is plausible, because the tractor beam in, once again, Star Wars Interregnum on the Imperial Star Destroyer will bring things closer to it. I think it's got you've got to mess around with the
motion
values, so it might require a little bit of work, but I think that's probably the solution for not needing to really adjust the range on the defense node, but then provide Borg turrets of a way to actually bring vessels into range of the turret cluster as a little sort of wrap. and shield drain torpedo possibly could have a slight buff.
Yeah.
Then on to, you got the repair node, which is fairly simple. Regeneration node, 6 tactical slots.
Probably the most powerful one, though.
The shipyard. Yeah, I think that's more just it's to reflect the fact that Borg have the most hull.
Yeah.
If you're healing 10 a second, you're going to be there all day if your cube's quite badly damaged. Lastly is the transwarp gates, and this is something I did mention earlier. Borg transwarp has had an overhaul. So whereas before you could just slap transwarp gates everywhere, they are now classified as a super weapon.
Yeah.
And so consequently, Borg transwarp gates now have a hard cap of 6 per faction. And this is where mentioning about the progenitor's strategic value in terms of the transwarp node is quite important. Because you can only have 6, and that's you need 4 planets for every 1 transwarp gate. So you actually can't build 2 transwarp gates until you own at least 8 planets. This fundamentally was done to address the fact one of the Borg's primary weaknesses was intended to be their mobility, but that was completely overcome by the capacity to just put transwarp gates everywhere. So with this system, we've actually managed to now bring back that being a weakness of the Borg. If they do not think about where they're placing their transwarp nodes and planning around how they can reinforce certain areas of their empire, they will potentially suffer. And if you're playing, for example, a large-scale free-for-all and you've got someone playing Borg, and you come under attack from multiple sides, if you don't have the transwarp gates to get between, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have some problems. And even in team games, which I would encourage people play, I tend to find team games are more enjoyable than, for example, 1v1s and free-for-alls. The tactical utility between factions you can achieve with the Borg in terms of their abilities and then the transwarp gates definitely can't be understated.
Yeah, and they're fragile too, so they really can succumb to fast-hitting forces. So again, when we talk about fighting the Borg, if you notice that the Borg player has put up a transwarp gate for a certain cluster and you're on the offensive there, we talked about the Federation as an example, with things like the Defiance and how you would use them with the MVAM, things like the Prometheus, or even, let's go further afield, just look at things like the Carriers. They're actually very susceptible. They've only got 16 armor, they've only got 11,000 health. Now that seems like a lot, but actually in reality it's not. So there's many ways to take a transwarp gate down. So the Borg players, one, need to be protecting their transwarp nodes, and two, you as players playing against the Borg faction need to think about how do I soften up an area I want to go after. And that can be, I think, Rob, if you scout 2, don't you? If you scout 2 transwarp nodes, you can take both out.
Well, yeah, you could even send a smaller or like sort of medium-sized fleet in one direction and attack in a place and get the Borg player, if they're prone to deathballing, to pull their fleet out of position and then send your entire fleet in somewhere else after a strike force destroys the transwarp gate, and it could be on the other side of the entire map. And you could strand the Borg fleet so far away they can't react before you do critical damage to them.
Yeah, absolutely. We've tried, guys, we said, to make the gameplay much more tactical for the Borg and the non-Borg players, and I think I feel personally, and I know you both agree, Tom and Rob, that we've kind of feel we've got there with the kind of tactical flexibility. We want them to be flexible, but at the same time they have to have a weakness, and that's the thing. So,
yeah, I think the Borg have a couple of weaknesses now. When we talk about how they play, I will kind of go into that more.
Yeah, and again, I want to go back on that progenitor. If they do get a progenitor out, but you can, because it's taking up a lot of their fleet, if you strand a progenitor itself far away, which is doable if you take out all the transwarp nodes across your path, he's very, very slow, so he might not be able to follow you around as easy. So Borg player has a lot of choices to make. And you can do a bit of a rope-a-dope on a lot of the Borg players, as Rob's already said. So there's a lot of play in that. I just wanted to highlight the communication nodes, because we do this with every faction, because the communication nodes have abilities. And in this case, just in case you didn't know, they have the We Are the Borg ability as well. So if you want to help your turrets out a little bit, or you want to help your starbase out a little bit, having an interlink node there for using the We Are Borg ability is not that bad a deal. And that kind of brings us, Tom, to sort of one of the last things we're going to talk about before we show off some action, which is the Unic Complex, Tom.
The Unic Complex, yep. So starbases in general have gone through a little bit of an overhaul in terms of their increased costs, as we've mentioned in the past. Unic complexes at the moment are something of I'm still not sure whether or not needs to change. Because whereas the starbases for other factions are very expensive to begin with, the Unic Complex is actually quite cheap. Its cost hasn't really changed all that much. I hazardous to say it's 3,300 and 250. I could be mistaken. What I could do is very quickly get a constructor built and just check it. 3,300 and 300. So when you then contrast that with a Federation starbase, which the construction cost is, I want to say 9,000.
Yeah, they're quite cheap.
They are very cheap in comparison, very much so.
And that's to kind of represent the fact that they don't have an outpost. So when you kind of build your first Unic Complex, you're actually building kind of like an outpost, really.
Essentially.
Essentially. And then the upgrades get just overwhelmingly expensive.
It's the upgrades where the cost really is. So the first upgrade cost is 6,000 credits, which on paper doesn't seem like too much, but then you're accompanying it with a 2,000 metal and 1,750 crystal cost for the first level. This is more of a potentially actually more cost effective but kind of deceptive thing, because whereas with other factions the star bases are upgraded one module at a time, you're getting everything upgraded all at the same time with the Unic Complex. So although the cost in terms of credits is less and the cost in terms of metal and crystal is more, you're probably looking at a relatively comparable resource cost upgrade ratio. The main question I have on my mind is to do with the weapon range on the Unic Complex, because it has a known habit of being able to outrange heavy siege vessels.
Very tough to take down.
So although the Unic Complex, although the siege vessels are meant to be very, very good against something like a Unic Complex, once it's got a few levels behind it and it can actually start to outrange them, the Unic Complex will then actually take care of the heavy siege. So how to address that is something that has been on my mind. Whether it needs addressing is a slightly different question. Because just the sheer cost of getting Unic Complex up to that level anyway now, in theory, should mean that if you're investing that much money in upgrading a Unic Complex to that position, you're either in a resource position to do so, or you're in such a strategic position that you've got to defend it that you're willing to invest that cash. And so being very easily able to just destroy that investment with a handful of super long range anti-module cruisers is sort of, is it fair, is it not fair? It's kind of tough to judge. So I think it's one of the things that might change, it might not change. I'm relatively satisfied with the way the resource cost is. Having some discussions with Rob before the stream, actually the Unic Complex being that cheap isn't necessarily the end of the world, because it is sort of outpost size, and from what I've been told, you can still deal with them. And of course, when it's at that tier, you can still outrange it with the anti-module cruisers.
It's a lot of money to invest as Borg as well, because you really need to get out your capital ships. You need to get them out in number. You need to get them leveling up, and you need to be teching. And if you're taking the money out of that to be building unit complexes everywhere, you're just going to die to like 3 siege ships.
Yeah, it's a choice. I mean, if you do go for the big upgrade and you manage to get one up, you do get a whopping 354,000 health. So it is an incredibly tanky thing at max level. But the likeliness of you seeing one at max health, I think is very slim these days. I think, in a competitive sense, you might, as a player against PvE, you might use one. And if you do get that far, guys, that's fantastic. It comes with its own nanite repair beam, so it's good at repairing things. It has shield drain torpedoes. It has its own holding beam, and it has Assimilation cloud at max level as well, which is great. And it can build ships. It can build cruisers and frigates. So it's kind of like, if you've invested, it's great. It's just an all-round fantastic starbase. But I don't think you're going to go all the way very often. You might put it, if you're playing a map or you've designed a map with friends where you've got more of a choke point, you may see them then, Rob, probably, maybe, potentially. If you're playing with friends and you're playing casually, you can really do almost anything you want and be successful. And against the AI, they really like to just throw things at unit complexes. And once you have a level 3 unit complex against an AI, I mean, they're in a choke point, they're going to die. So from that standpoint, from a non-competitive standpoint, I think these are very, very, very powerful. Or like against the AI. Against the AI, they're terribly obnoxious, because the AI can just do whatever it wants, and it can just start building them 10 minutes into the game and having them level 3, 15 minutes into the game. Yeah.
But like from a competitive standpoint, I almost don't think you'll see unit complexes unless you desperately need to hold a specific area.
Yeah. I mean, what do you from a competitive, as we talk about the multiplayer server you run a lot. Here, and I'm sure I know a lot of the viewers watching this will be interested in this, and those that are watching later on. But I mean, do the Borg have play in the competitive scene? Can they compete with the other factions?
Before this patch, I really didn't play Borg very much, because if I even got Borg like like I pick random and it gave me Borg, people would just leave the game. Because they considered it too overpowered to be played against. I think now it's in a place where it is competitive and it's strong and it has a lot of good strengths, especially in the late game. But there's a lot of weaknesses you can exploit, and I think it's as balanced as it's ever been. That's for sure.
Yeah. So can for example a player playing Federation take on a Borg player competitively? Is that doable?
Yes, you can beat any faction as any other faction. I think on some matchups it's very difficult. For instance, Borg is very good against Federation. They will have a hard time. Union's very good against Borg. Borg will have a hard time. But in a game with 6 factions, that's to be expected. That you're not going to have perfect balance, and I mean we just don't have the manpower or the time to get perfect balance. That's one thing to the community I want to say is we've put a lot of work and hundreds, thousands of man hours in balancing this thing the best we can. But at the end of the day, we just don't have the resources to iron it out for the next decade to get it to be like perfectly balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's time to show off some stuff. Unless, Tom, you've got anything else you want to add to that?
Not particularly, no.
Great. Let's go take our Assimilation cube for a little spin over to this planet. He's a bit slow, as all cubes are. And apparently we're under attack somewhere else. I don't know where. Over here, there's a fight going on over here from a simulated ship we've assimilated. But we'll leave that for now. Let's see. So that's the thing that you need to remember, guys, is the Borg are very fast at warping, but incredibly slow at moving through a gravity well, which is what Rob was referring to, which is why you don't really want your Borg cube to end up right at the planet, which is where the trapezoid and what Tom was saying earlier about using the siege beam and having some obelisks around is actually quite handy. And you can see this is a fantastic example of the target banks at play here. The amount of shots just kind of going out. And you can see that we've actually changed the cutting beams now to the new beam effects as well, which I'm quite excited about. And the cruisers are already like half damaged before they've even had a chance to fire their guns. So that's how extreme the Borg cube range can get. But you can see as more targets engage it, his armour will go up. Now it's down to 1, the armour drops off. So you can kind of see that mechanic in progress there. I think we need to give it a little bit more of an enemy here. So let's. There's lots of ships coming, but I'm not really worried about these kind of militia. So what we're going to do is we're going to spawn in, I think, some Federation. Why not?
Make a fleet. Make a whole fleet.
let's make a fleet to fight it. Let's do... remind me, Tom, what was at War 359? What did we have? We had a Sovereign class, didn't we? Obviously.
Wolf
A bunch of wimpy humans.
Not Wolf, right. Sorry.
Sovereign?
First contact,
What?
sorry. First contact, sorry, is what I meant to say.
First contact. Sovereign, Norways, Akiras, Sabres.
Norways. Let's do some Akiras as well, yeah?
I don't think any one Defiant with Worf on it. I don't think we can quite mimic that here. We could probably add Cisco maybe if you can spawn him in. I don't think you can.
Yeah.
I don't think there were any token Mirandas to be sacrificed. Steam runners.
We had some steam runners. I don't know if these ships are actually going to survive. Well, I thought let's pause this quickly. Before they all die to the might of the Borg cube. So let's do a couple of steam runners. Let's see, steam runners. Let's do some Curry's classes. Why not? Mirandas. We need some Mirandas. We'll do some steam runners in there. We'll do some Sabres for fun because they were designed to take on the Borg. We'd said a Defiant class. Do a couple of those. Maybe a Constellation.
One token Defiant.
We'll. One token Defiant was in the film. Let's add another couple of capital ships in there. We'll do Nebula class because I think we saw a Nebula. No, we saw a Kira. Didn't we?
No idea.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there. Well, that'll be enough.
The Nebula Phoenix types. I think an Excalibur might have been there.
That may be one step too far, but we'll see. And then I'm just going to switch player quickly so I can tell them all to attack because they're all trying to run away like scaredy cats.
Target their primary
and let's turn this to not AI. Change player. Player is not AI. There we go. So they'll do what I say now. So
target their primary systems.
Okay. So there's my Federation fleet having fun. Let's change the player back. And let's have a look at our Borg ship. So you can see our Borg ship here is under assault from a lot of Federation ships. And yeah, you can just watch yourself, guys. The hull and the armour at the moment. And it's taking debuffs. But
yeah, it's by itself too.
It's by itself. So it costs a lot of supply, but this is a Federation fleet engaging it actively. Now, I'm not microing the Federation fleet, but with the hull regeneration at max level and the kind of armour it has, and the fact that it's getting extra 10 armour and 10% damage reduction at the moment, it really just does not care. I haven't even got the full level.
It helps that it's using all research as well, so it's got all of the artifact bonuses.
Yeah, the artifact does help as well, I will admit. But at this point, it's going to take a lot to try and take down an assimilation cube here. And I'm pretty sure this Federation fleet, which has no research, to be fair, at the moment, are going to struggle. In fact, you can see already the target banks that we have mentioned there coming into play. And it's the problem with the you've got to zoom out quite a lot to just even see the battle with a cube, because this is zoomed in at full. The Currys are trying to mate with the ship. They're that desperate to fight it.
Yeah, and I mean, I wouldn't even... In a normal circumstance, you wouldn't send one out probably all alone either. It would have a few ships, a couple adapters, a couple of simulators.
Oh dear. We are now seeing the holding beam disable the Nebula, so... There we go. I couldn't have asked for a better example there because I left that manually, automatically targeting. And still, this Federation fleet is trying to do damage here.
I mean, they've done some, to their credit.
The Defiant is about to explode.
Preparing for ramming speed.
That's one tough little ship, but not that tough.
Yeah, when these cubes, when they're supported, they are
monsters.
They're disgusting.
Got my favourite ship of all time, the Nebula.
Pretty glorious battle.
And I just want to point this out. This cube still has 58,000 hull. This Nebula has 3,332.
Not to worry, Keith, your favourite ship couldn't do it.
I know, I believe in it. I believe in it.
Nebulas are good ships. They're not that good.
Well, he's gained a level at least in fighting the Borg cube. We'll have a look at our friend the Sovereign class here. It's taken quite a bit of damage itself, and they're still fighting it out. Now, this is the tipping point. So, as the Federation fleet starts to get taken down, one of the sort of concerns that they'll have if they're not applying that damage is the regeneration that's built into the Borg naturally. And as you can see, it's sort of repairing itself quite substantially at max level research. So when we say the Borg are a bit of a roller coaster, they really are. As their research comes up and up and up, they become incredibly powerful at regenerating their health. And the Federation now is at the point that it's actually not actually able to kill it at all. It's just going to keep healing.
Yeah, once you start taking damage, because of the damage system in the game, ships will take damage and then they do less and less damage to other things. In order to get a Borg cube down low enough that it does less damage is a significant task, whereas it's going to get a lot of your ships down to the point where they don't deal that much damage quickly, and then it's going to start out-regenning them.
Yeah. And I think it has actually assimilated a ship over here as well, yeah?
Yeah.
So, and actually, I think all that's left of the Federation is the two capital ships. And this is a good example as well of how the capital ships are a lot more tanky now. Obviously not tanky enough to take out this cube today, but a really good example nonetheless. And I hope that kind of demonstrates how powerful a cube can be. Now, it's fair to say that these aren't indestructible. They will still go down. So if you're worried that the Borg are now so powerful that they can't be beaten, just to reassure you, that was an unteched up Federation fleet. Probably not the loadout you'd have, but you've got to remember the Borg won't have loads and loads of these vessels all in the same world, because if they do and they try to deathball, it's very much at their disadvantage, isn't it, Rob? It's now, that's not the kind of gameplay you really want to go for. You need to spread out.
Yeah, you're going to want to be... The way I play Borg now is I kind of like to fly into the edges of wells and trade with the enemy. I like to have them fight my capital ships down to a lower health, and then I'll retreat, and as it sort of fought, it will kill enemy ships and gain experience, and I like to kind of just trade out health on my capital ships, take them back, repair them until they're all level 10, and then I like to have 2 or 3 groups of them go out in different directions and just kind of pincer move the opponent and kind of hit them from all sides where they can't really hold any one of the fleets, and so they kind of just die.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, that is an example of how tough the cubes are. If you've got any questions, now's the time to ask in the chat, because we're coming to the end of the stream. What I will say, I see there's a question about the AI there. So I would just say that the Borg AI are slightly better than the standard AI on the other factions. I have tweaked
It's a lot better in practice.
Yeah,
I know practice, on paper it's maybe slightly, but in practice it's huge.
Yeah, I think you will want to fight the Borg. I wouldn't play PvE, so player versus environment. I wouldn't play against the AI without a friend against the Borg, unless you put them on the weakest setting, and even then they're still pretty clever. They'll just you can beat them. You can beat them.
I can beat them confidently up to the get some difficulty. I used to be able to beat them about 1 in 3 times on the highest difficulty. Then you buffed it, and I've tried everything I can think of. I cannot beat them.
So the Borg challenge is back, guys. You know, you can try with a team of friends to take on the highest level of difficulty as a team of players. You know, I would suggest maybe 4 players versus 1 high level Borg player, and see how you get on, guys. Let us know. You know, I'm really excited when it gets released. We hope to see some people take up that Borg challenge. So I think that's a good place to kind of bring the stream to a close. Is there any final comments you just want to give about playing the Borg, and what to kind of advice you want to give, Rob, before we finish up?
Yeah. So the Borg's sort of biggest strengths are sometimes also their weaknesses. For instance, their economy is very, very powerful. Their trade does like 3 times what anybody else's trade does. But that does mean that if you target their trade as their opponent, and you can keep them from getting their trade up and secured, it can be very devastating. The biggest thing against the Borg now is stop them from getting to that super ultra late game, and try to win in the early or the mid game with pushes. I think outside of that, target their transwarp, try to outmaneuver them, and I think that's the best thing you can do. Just outmaneuver them and try to pick them apart from a lot of different directions. Don't just fight them in one spot. They'll just sit there and basically fly their capital ships back and forth, level them up to 10, and once their capital ships are at max tech level 10, you're not going to win against them.
Yeah, they're very, very tough. And Tom, for yourself, any final advice, things you want to mention, what people can expect coming up in the faction?
Don't forget the other capital ships. All I can really... one of the unfortunate realities in the past has been, you know, Borg players will skip a lot of the, on face value, less...
Don't skip your trapezoid.
Cap ships in favour of other ones.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. The cap ships have had a lot of work added in. As we mentioned, the... Borg cubes are now having a small ability rework, because some of their abilities actually were a little bit poor in design concept, and so, you know, the work has gone in to make the non-cube cap ships interesting, dynamic, and viable. And when it comes to your fleet supply total, actually investing in some of these lower cost capital ships is often more effective than just getting a cube.
No, you need them.
These cap ships still have the composite damage, like they'll still do very good damage to everything. They still have an excellent ability loadout, and you will find much more support for your frigates and cruisers with these capital ships than you will with cubes. Cubes are more independent than the other capital ships, and the other capital ships will benefit other fleet builds a lot more than having a cube will.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you're playing against a skilled player and you decide, I don't want to build any early game capital ships, I'm just going to tech straight up to a cube, you will be dead in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
you will not survive.
And I think it's important to note, you know, a capital ship, even the cheapest one, is 130 supply for a trapezoid. Again, don't forget the cruisers. Capital ships are now good, yes, for the Borg, but the cruisers bring a lot to the table. Pyramids being 18 supply, spheres being 26, and so on and so forth. Really, really good to have cruisers in that. So early mid-game, you want to focus on frigates and cruisers, and using your trapezoid, obviously, as well. Think about the obelisk frigate as well to get those, hunters going around into the core world to destroy those planets down with the help of the trapezoid. And colonize, try to use the trapezoid to colonize to get that extra lovely juicy population. And I think you can't go wrong with the Borg. As I said, there's always a fear whenever we put the Borg in, and this is my final, that the Borg are going to be completely overpowered. I would say, guys, if you're playing with your friends, the Borg are just like any other faction. It comes down to how the player is going to use them. And as we said, there are some factions that do worse against them. There are some factions that do better. I know for a fact that Rob loves to play Dominion and Union, as he mentioned earlier, against them. And Dominion and Union are very strong against the Borg. They have some really good anti-heavy ships, which are totally great at really hitting the Borg cruisers hard. So there are very good possibilities of damaging them early and mid-game. And we in our testing, at least on 1v1 maps, for example, when you're playing against a friend, we tend to find that actually most of the games are over in the mid game. They don't even get to the late game, quite commonly on the smaller maps. So there is that to bear in mind if you're playing this faction. Just because they seem super powerful at end tech doesn't mean you'll actually get there. And like all factions, they suffer from losing their structures. Their structures have had a little bit of a nerf. They seem like they have a lot of health, but bearing in mind that the Borg have no shields, so taking out their adaptation nodes, etc., with a strike force like carriers knocks their research down, and they actually lose a lot of their momentum from losing their research because they're slow to respond. So our hard-hitting strike forces to harass their research and knock them down a peg or two is the way to go. And if you're doing that, you can't go too wrong. As always, guys, I want to thank Rob and Tom for joining me once again on another Stellar Parallax stream. So thank you, guys.
As always, you're welcome.
And we will call it here, guys. Thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed the stream. The next stream I'll try and get some more notice up for, because I know it was a bit short as this one. But the next stream we will be looking at the wonderful Romulan Star Empire, my favourites of all time, as everybody knows. And I'm looking forward to showing you some great changes across the Romulan Star Empire, and some addition of new models that we've had put in to replace older models, and some new abilities. Stay tuned to our chat on Discord for that, and when we're going to do that stream. And as I said, we're gonna work hard on finishing some of the bits here in the Borg up, because there are still a few things that we need to do. So expect a news post on the Borg, just a little bit about the string text and those abilities we mentioned for the cubes. And do comment and subscribe to Stellar Parallax. If you're first time here at Stellar Parallax, do subscribe. We have 2 other mods we're working on, as well as packs for Stellaris coming up in the new year. So I hope you've enjoyed it, guys. Thanks for joining us. See you again very, very soon. Good night.